I'll never forget that night. The night that changed everything. The night that showed me what people are truly capable of, even the ones who claim to love you. It was supposed to be just another Sunday dinner, you know, the kind where families gather around the table, share food, stories, and laughter, except that night. The laughter felt different. It felt forced. The dining room was glowing softly with candlelight. The aroma of roasted chicken and garlic bread filled the air. There was music playing in the background. Margaret's favorite old jazz tunes, the kind she said made dinners feel classy. Daniel, my husband, was in his usual cheerful mood. He had no idea about the silent storm brewing between his wife and his mother. He sat at the head of the table, laughing with his father about work, completely oblivious to the cold glances being exchanged across the plates. And there she was, Margaret, my mother-in-law, dressed in her signature pearl necklace, her hair pinned neatly, her perfume strong enough to fill the room. She smiled at me, that tight-lipped smile that never touched her eyes. You know that kind of person who hugs you at family events, but you can feel the chill in their touch? That was her, every gesture sweet on the surface, but dripping with quiet resentment underneath. I tried. God knows. I tried so hard to win her over. I cooked for her, visited her when she was ill, even planned birthdays and anniversaries just to show I cared. But nothing ever seemed enough, because deep down, she didn't want to see me as part of the family. She wanted to see me gone. That evening, as we sat around the table, she started her usual comments, the ones that looked innocent to others but carried sharp edges meant just for me. So, dear, she said, her voice sweet but her eyes piercing, when I was your age, I already had 2 children and a spotless home. Times have really changed, haven't they? Daniel chuckled, thinking it was just a harmless joke, but I could hear the venom in her tone. Her words weren't just conversation. They were meant to remind me that in her eyes, I'd never measure up. I smiled politely, keeping my tone calm. Yes, times have changed, I said softly. And thankfully, so have expectations. She didn't like that. I saw the flicker of annoyance cross her face, just for a second. She leaned forward and reached for the wine bottle. Oh, you must try this, she said. It's from our family cellar. A special vintage, one we only open for important guests. Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes cold, calculating. As she poured the wine into my glass, her hand trembled slightly. The candlelight flickered, catching the edge of the glass. And I could swear, just for a moment, I saw something like satisfaction in her gaze. She filled my glass higher than usual, then sat back down with that same fake smile. There you go, dear, she said. You deserve a good drink after all your hard work. Her tone made hard work sound like a joke. Daniel didn't notice. He was busy checking his phone, probably replying to his colleagues. I just sat there, staring at the glass. Something inside me, some quiet instinct, told me not to drink, but I didn't want to make a scene. Not again. Not when I'd already been accused of being too sensitive. Every time I pointed out her cruelty. So, I smiled and lifted the glass. The red wine glimmered in the light, deep and dark, swirling like secrets in liquid form. But as I raised it to my lips, she was watching me, too closely. Her eyes were fixed on me almost eagerly, like she was waiting for something to happen. That was the moment my gut twisted. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't nerves, it was instinct, that raw human signal that whispers, something isn't right. Her smile didn't look like a mother's smile. It looked like victory. And while the rest of the family laughed and talked, I sat there in silence, holding that glass. The moment the wine touched my tongue, I froze. Something was wrong. It wasn't the smooth, fruity taste I expected. It was bitter, sharp, metallic, almost like medicine. I blinked, trying to brush it off. Maybe the bottle had gone bad. Maybe it was just the nerves of being around Margaret again. But the bitterness lingered, stubborn, unnatural, coating my throat like something I wasn't supposed to swallow. Across the table, Margaret tilted her head slightly. Everything okay, dear? she asked, her voice sugar-sweet, her lips curling into a polite smile, but her eyes were studying me. I forced a small laugh, pretending nothing was wrong. Yes, just maybe the wine's a bit strong, I said, trying to sound casual. She chuckled softly, folding her hands on the table. Oh, nonsense. It's one of Daniel's favorites. I made sure it was perfect. Perfect. The word echoed in my head. She emphasized it, as if she was proud of something. My stomach churned. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling, reaching for my fork just to look busy, but my fingers trembled slightly. I looked around the table. Everyone was busy chatting, laughing, eating, everyone except her. Margaret was still watching me, not out of concern, but anticipation. There was something predatory in her gaze, something cold and calculating. It was like she was waiting for a show to start, my show. I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd been nervous around her before. Maybe my mind was just playing tricks, but then I saw it. She leaned slightly toward her husband, whispered something into his ear, and the two of them shared a quiet smirk, a smirk that lasted only a second. But it was enough. Enough to confirm what my gut was already screaming. I wasn't imagining this. Something wasn't right. I could feel my pulse quicken. My palms grew damp against the napkin on my lap. A cold sweat crept down my neck as my mind raced. What did she put in that glass? Why was she watching me like that? And why did her husband look just as guilty? I had to think fast. I couldn't accuse her. Not yet. Daniel wouldn't believe me. Not without proof. To him, she was the perfect, loving mother. To me, she was becoming something else entirely. So I took a deep breath and acted. I brought the napkin to my mouth, pretending to cough. Are you all right, sweetheart? Daniel asked, concerned. I nodded quickly, forcing a small smile. Yeah, just swallowed wrong. As everyone turned their attention to me, I made my move. Slowly, carefully, I slid my glass just a few inches across the table, closer to Margaret's side. Then, while pretending to fix my hair, I shifted my hand, just enough, to swap our glasses. No one noticed, not even her, and felt my heart hammering in my chest so loudly it drowned out the chatter around me. Every second felt like a minute as I prayed no one saw. When I finally leaned back in my chair, pretending to relax, I saw her watching again, eyes sharp, scanning my face. Careful, dear, she said, tilting her head. You look a bit pale. Maybe the wine's stronger than you thought? Her voice was taunting now, subtle but cutting. I managed a weak smile. Maybe I just need some water, I replied softly. And then I waited. I kept my eyes on her, pretending to adjust my napkin, my hands trembling under the table. Margaret lifted the glass, my glass, and swirled the wine. She hesitated for just a second, then smiled as if proud of her handiwork, and in one graceful motion. She took a sip. Time seemed to slow. I watched her lips touch the rim of the glass, watched her swallow, watched her set it down gently. She smiled at me, that same superior smile, completely unaware of what she had just done. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. All I could think was, now we'll see. Because if I was right, if that glass really was meant for me, it didn't take long, not even 5 minutes after she sipped from that glass. At first, she looked perfectly fine, her usual composed, smug self. But then, something in her expression shifted. The color drained from her cheeks. Her confident smile faltered. She blinked once. Then again. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her napkin, and I could see a flicker of discomfort cross her face. Is it warm in here? She murmured, fanning herself with her hand. Her husband looked at her, puzzled. Warm? It's barely 70 degrees, Margaret. But she didn't respond. She just pressed her palm against her temple and exhaled sharply, like she was suddenly out of breath. Are you sure you're okay? I asked softly, my voice dripping with concern, though my heart was hammering in my chest. It took everything in me not to reveal the storm of emotions boiling inside. She nodded weakly. I'm fine, dear. Just a little dizzy. Her hand trembled as she set the wineglass down. The faint clink of glass against wood felt deafening in that silent room. Then, she slumped slightly in her chair, It happened so fast that for a second no one moved. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice breaking the stillness. He rushed to her side, gripping her shoulder. "Mom, what's wrong?" She tried to speak, but her words came out slurred, almost incoherent. Her husband stood up, knocking over his fork, and hurried toward her. "I told you not to drink so fast," he scolded, though his tone wasn't frustration. It was fear. I stayed seated, frozen in my chair, pretending to be shocked. My hand covered my mouth as if in horror. But deep inside, a cold truth settled in my chest, a truth that made my skin crawl and my blood run cold. There was something in that drink. The bitterness. The strange way she was watching me. The whispering. The smirk. It all made sense now. She wasn't just being cruel. She was trying to hurt me. The next few minutes were chaos. Daniel's father barked out instructions. "Telling everyone to stay calm. Get her upstairs," he said, grabbing her arm. Daniel tried to help, but his father snapped, "I've got her." That tone, sharp, defensive, sent a shiver through me. I stood there, uselessly clutching my napkin, watching as they helped her up the stairs. Margaret's legs wobbled, her body heavy against them. Daniel turned to me briefly. "Can you call the doctor?" But before I could even move, his father interrupted. "No need," he said quickly. "She's fine. It's probably her blood sugar again." "Blood sugar?" Daniel repeated, confused. "Yes," his father insisted. "She's been under stress. She just needs to rest." He didn't look at me when he said it, not once, and that's when I saw it. The look in his eyes, that flash of panic, that silent knowing. He knew something. He knew exactly what was happening. And he didn't want anyone else to. Daniel hesitated, torn between concern and confusion. Eventually, he sighed. "Okay, fine. Let's just make sure she's comfortable." They disappeared upstairs, leaving me standing in the quiet dining room, surrounded by the faint hum of the chandelier and the ticking of the wall clock. I stared at the half-eaten food, the empty plates, the half-full wine glasses. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful, and yet nothing about that night was normal anymore. When everyone finally went to bed, I stayed behind. The house had gone still, only the sound of the refrigerator humming and the faint creak of floorboards upstairs. I sat at the table, staring at the 2 wine glasses, one empty, one half full. The candle had burned low, its flame barely alive. I could still smell the faint trace of her perfume in the air, sweet and poisonous. My fingers brushed against the rim of the empty glass, the one she had just used, the one that was supposed to be mine. And, for the first time that night, I let out a shaky breath, a mix of relief and fear, because my suspicion wasn't just a thought anymore. It was real. She had done. I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet in that fragile way it gets right before morning, the kind of silence that makes every small sound feel enormous. I padded down the hallway, careful not to wake Daniel. He'd said Margaret was still resting upstairs, that his father was with her. His voice had been polite, but there had been an edge to it, a little too much smoothness. He'd avoided my eyes the whole time, and that avoidance sat like a stone in my stomach. When they left to pick up her medication, I felt something shift inside me. It was a small window, one of those rare moments when the house belonged only to me. I told myself I wasn't snooping. I told myself I was just checking. But the truth was simpler and darker. I needed to know. Her room smelled faintly of lavender and powder. It was neat in that way older women keep a room, little doilies on the dresser, a photograph in a silver frame, a stack of mail tied with string. I tried to steady my breathing as I moved toward the dresser. Her purse was there, casually tossed like she'd set it down in a hurry. I should have put it back and walked away. I didn't. Inside the purse, beneath a pair of red gloves and a lipstick, I found a small brown bottle with a faded label. My hands went cold. I turned it over slowly, like the motion might change what I was about to discover. No perfume, no harmless vitamins. The label had been rubbed almost illegibly, But the shape of the bottle and the faint notes on the tag told me everything I needed to know. It was a mild sedative. The kind that makes your head foggy, your limbs heavy, the kind of thing that could make someone dizzy, disoriented, or even slip into sleep if enough was given. The kind you could dissolve into a drink and call it an accident. My knees felt weak. I slid down onto the chair by the window, the light of morning washing across the floorboards. So it was true. She had planned something. She had planned it for me. Why? The question spun inside my head until it felt like glass. Why would she do that to me? I thought of the dinners I'd cooked, the little parcels I'd left on her doorstep when she was ill, the holidays I'd tried to make special. I thought of every effort I'd made to be part of this family, and now the raw, awful possibility began to take shape. None of it mattered. To her, I was a threat. I kept looking, like proof could somehow change things or heal the sting. I opened a drawer and found neatly folded napkins, a collection of church flyers, and beneath them, a paper folded so many times it had softened at the creases. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. It was a torn letter. The handwriting, looping, tidy, was unmistakably hers. The words were short, venom wrapped in neat script. She's after his money. I won't let her ruin this family. I read it again and again until the sentence had no meaning except the cold weight of betrayal. It was a simple line, but it carried 1,000 accusations. She'd seen me not as the woman who loved her son, but as a thief in waiting, a destroyer of family legacy. All those dinners and late-night talks and careful smiles meant nothing compared to her fear of losing control. My first reaction was fury, hot and fierce. How dare she write that about me? How dare she think to plot against me in the sanctuary of our home? But under the heat, there was another thing, a terrible, hollow hurt. I had let myself be vulnerable in this family. I had trusted, and she had planned to weaponize that trust. I put the letter back where I found it and took the sedative bottle in both hands, feeling the glass chill under my palms. For a moment I pictured the scene again, me sipping, the bitterness, the smirk shared across the table. The memory made my throat tighten. I had been a target, chosen not just by her, but by the quiet conspiracy that crouched behind her smile. I could have left then. I could have confronted them all in that bright, awkward morning light and demanded answers. I could have called Daniel and shown him the bottle and the letter and watched his face unravel. But something in me knew that raw confrontation without proof would be easy for them to dismiss. They would say I was emotional, jealous, overreacting. Daniel would perhaps close ranks with his mother. So instead, I closed the drawer with care and smoothed the purse back into place as if nothing had happened. I left no fingerprints, no evidence of my search. I walked downstairs with a calm I did not feel, and poured myself a cup of tea to steady my hands. Sitting at the kitchen table, watching steam curl up and disappear, I made a promise. Not loud, not dramatic, but steel in my chest. If she wanted a war, she would have one. Not with poison or panic, but with truth. She would be exposed. I would make sure the mask slipped cleanly from her face so everyone could see what she had been hiding. As I stood and looked at the window where morning light had begun to chase away the shadows, I felt something harden inside me. Not hatred, not yet, but resolve. I would not be the victim of someone else's fear and bitterness. If she thought she could break me with a glass and a whisper, she had another thing coming. That day, with the sedative bottle tucked away in the quiet part of my mind and the torn letter burning like a brand on my heart, I laid down the first stones of a plan. I didn't want to hurt her. I wanted her to see what she'd done, clearly, painfully, in a way that couldn't be smoothed over with a fake apology or crocodile tears. I wanted the family to hear the words she'd whispered in the dark and watch the face she wore when she thought no one was looking. I wanted truth to sit at that table where she had tried to put poison, so I began to watch. Not in the dramatic way you see in films, no midnight stakeouts or dramatic confrontations. I watched in the small, quiet ways. I watched how she positioned herself in the living room so that Daniel would sit where she could easily lean in and whisper. I learned the cadence of her voice when she wanted pity, the soft wobble, the head tilted just so. I noticed the tiny performances, the cough that always came right before a complaint, the sudden tears when conversation turned to money or inheritance, The way she would brush past me and leave a folded note on Daniel's side table. I recorded it all. Not because I wanted to collect ammunition, but because I needed the family to see it without relying only on my memory. Words could be denied, accusations could be turned back on me. But a recording, a voice saying what it said, a pause where it paused, is hard to argue with. I placed a small voice recorder in the lining of my coat and, at times when Daniel and I had dinner upstairs, I left it in the living room. I learned to pretend not to notice when she walked in, smile as if I was the grateful daughter-in-law, and let the recorder pick up her little stage. Once, when she made a comment about how I didn't understand family money, I kept the recorder running while I asked follow-up questions, forcing her to clarify. She did, she explained. I captured it. I also set up a discreet camera, the kind that disappears behind a smoky dining room mirror. It was small, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. I paid attention to angles and light. I tested it. I made sure the lens could catch the exact moment a hand reached for a glass, the fold of a napkin, the curl of someone's mouth when they shared a secret. I practiced turning the microphone on and off until it felt like second nature. Everything had to be flawless because one slip-up would let them write it off as a mistake. Days turned into weeks of quiet observation. I watched Margaret orchestrate tiny scenes, a confession to Daniel about worries over the family estate. A staged incident where she acted faint to elicit sympathy and control. The way she'd lean close and murmur, "You must be careful with her," as if planting doubt were a favor. She was an architect of whispers, and I watched her lay each brick. I planned the dinner with the kind of meticulousness that comes when something matters too much to leave to chance. Same table, same candles, same jazz record. The details were important, not because they were grand, but because they would make it harder for anyone to say it was staged. Familiarity would make the reveal sting more. This was not some new house, some unfamiliar setting. This was the table where she'd tried to break me. I invited everyone. Daniel, his father, Margaret, a few cousins they would listen to, people who trusted Margaret's opinion. I made the evening feel casual, even comfortable. I cooked the dishes she always praised because I wanted the surface to be ordinary. People let down their guard when things felt normal. When the family arrived, Margaret floated in like she owned the room. Pearls, powder, the practiced tilt of head. "Hosting again, dear?" she called, the kind of comment that sounds like approval and carries a hidden barb. She believed herself to be the judge of my performance. I smiled. "Oh, this time. I want everything to be perfect," I answered. And the words were true. My heartbeat was steady. My outward calm was a mask I had learned to wear many times. We took our places. The camera hid behind the mirror, steady and silent. The recorder sat in the small plant by the centerpiece. I had one more device, a tiny clip recorder I slid under the table, its mic pointed toward Margaret's face. I thought of nothing violent or cruel. I only thought of the truth, clear and undeniable. As the dinner progressed the usual way, laughter and small talk filling the room, I watched Margaret move. She still used her familiar tricks. She nudged Daniel's knee with a story meant to make him defensive. She offered a helpful anecdote to the cousins, casting me as naive. She reached for my glass a few times, a habit I had come to recognize as more than habit. I felt a quiet satisfaction. She had not learned to hide everything. There were gestures that betrayed her. Then, predictably, she tried to take control of the moment again. She reached for my wine. This time, I didn't hesitate. I stopped her, not with accusation, not with anger. I placed my hand lightly on her wrist. My voice was soft and steady. "Margaret, why don't you drink first tonight?" I said. It happened fast. The room went still like a held breath. Conversation softened mid-sentence. Daniel's fork hovered above his plate. Her smile flickered and then froze. The air had the sharpness of glass. He looked from me to his mother, question written all over his face. "What's going on?" he asked. I didn't answer him. Instead, I slid a small recorder across the table to where his mother sat. The device was old-fashioned, unassuming, something she would not recognize as an accusation. She stared at it for a beat, then up at me. "Maybe you should explain this," I said. Her face was a mask for a moment, then something like panic skittered through her eyes. She tried to laugh, to deflect. "What is this, dear? A joke?" But the camera had already been recording for an hour. My recorder had captured the whisper she thought private. The tiny under-table mic had caught the breath, the hesitation, the exact words she'd used when she'd planned to make me sick. Daniel's confusion hardened into a guarded anger. "Margaret," he said slowly. "What's—" She faltered. She tried to weave a story about being worried, about stress and misreading a gesture. But the playback did what words alone could not. It let him hear her say, plainly and proudly, things she'd intended as strategy. Her tone betrayed her. The rawness of her plan could be heard in the clips, no longer a rumor or a hunch, but a recorded confession. There's a peculiar sound when a mask slips. For a moment you hear fabric fall and something honest underneath. That sound filled the dining room. His father's face went white. Cousins looked at one another, incredulous. Daniel stood, both hands on the table, and the world narrowed down to the sound of the recorder's tiny beep as it played back truth. I felt a rush, not of triumph exactly, but of a cold, steady relief. This wasn't about me getting even. This was about restoring balance. If Margaret had tried to make me vanish with a glass and a whisper, then I would bring her into the light with a recording and a question. No spectacle, no cruelty, just the truth served plain for everyone to see. When the words ended, the quiet that followed was different from the quiet of any ordinary dinner. It was the quiet of people watching a story change shape, of trust rearranging itself at the table. I had set my trap not to destroy. The moment I pressed play, time seemed to stop. The gentle hum of the ceiling fan, the clinking of silverware, everything vanished beneath the weight of her own voice echoing through the dining room. She's after his money. I'll make her sick before she gets her claws in deeper. Every syllable cut through the air like glass. Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief, his fork clattering onto the plate. His father's face drained of color, his mouth slightly open. The image of a man realizing the woman he thought he knew had been hiding something dark beneath the surface. Margaret froze. The color fled from her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she reached for the edge of the table, as if it might hold her up. Her lips parted, searching for a lie that could undo the truth that was now playing in front of everyone. "Where did you—" she began, her voice shaking. "I found it," I said, steady, unflinching. "Right next to the sedative bottle you kept in your purse." A gasp rippled through the table. You could almost hear hearts breaking, not for her, but for the illusion that had just shattered. Margaret blinked rapidly, her eyes glistening with forced tears. That's not what it sounds like," she stammered. "It was a misunderstanding. Don't," I said, cutting her off. "You planned to hurt me because you couldn't control your son anymore." Her gaze darted toward Daniel, pleading, desperate, searching for sympathy she no longer deserved. But he wouldn't look at her. He was standing now, his expression a storm of disbelief and anger. "Mom, how could you?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. "You wanted to make her sick? You tried to—" He stopped, the word choking in his throat. Margaret tried to cry then, but it wasn't the cry of a mother who regretted what she'd done. It was the cry of someone cornered, someone whose lies had finally stopped working. The cousins exchanged uneasy glances. His father closed his eyes, shaking his head in silent shame. And me, I just stood there calm, not victorious, just done. For so long, I had tried to win her approval, to belong, to make her see me as more than the outsider she decided I was. But in that moment I realized I didn't need her acceptance. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I took a deep breath and said softly, "You tried to poison me because you couldn't stand losing control. But you've already lost it." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The queen of manipulation, silent for once. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor, a sound that felt final. And then I stood up and walked away. Behind me, no one moved. The weight of truth hung heavy in the air. As I reached the doorway, Daniel's voice finally broke the silence. He didn't shout, he didn't curse. He just said, quietly, almost like a verdict, "Maybe it's time." It's been months since that night, and though the memories still linger, they no longer haunt me. They teach me. Margaret doesn't come around anymore. The house feels quieter, lighter. No forced smiles across the dinner table. No whispered insults disguised as concern. Just peace, the kind that only comes when truth finally takes its place. Daniel has changed too. He looks at me differently now, not with the doubt his mother planted in him, but with understanding and regret. He's seen what I had been trying to show him for years. That love, real love, can't exist where control does. We don't talk much about that night. We don't need to. The silence says enough. Sometimes, when I pass by the dining room, I catch myself staring at that table, the one where everything fell apart. It's strange. That same place where I nearly lost myself became the place I found my strength. I didn't need to destroy her life. I didn't even need to hate her. All I had to do was expose the truth. Because revenge doesn't always come in flames or fury. It doesn't always mean shouting or breaking things. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is calm, letting the truth echo in the spaces where lies once lived. That's what I learned. Silence can be louder than anger, and dignity, quiet, steady dignity, can undo the deepest manipulation. I still remember that bitter taste from the first sip that night, how it burned, how it made me question everything. Now, when I think of it, it's no longer the taste of fear. It's the taste of awakening. Never let anyone decide your worth, not even family, because sometimes the people who smile the brightest, the ones who preach love the loudest, are the very ones holding poison behind their back. And when they show you